151. 1 Kitchen. The place I like best in this world is the kitchen. No matter where it is, no matter what kind, if it's a kitchen, if it's a place where they make food, it's fine with me. Ideally it should be well broken in. Lots of tea towels, dry and immaculate. White tile catching the light, ting, ting. I love even incredibly dirty kitchens to distraction. Vegetable droppings all over the floor, so dirty your slippers turn black on the bottom. Strangely, it's better if this kind of kitchen is large. I lean up against the silver door of a towering, giant refrigerator stocked with enough food to get through a winter. When I raise my eyes from the banana Yoshimoto, oil-spattered gas burner and the rusty kitchen knife, outside the window stars are glittering, lonely. Now only the kitchen and I are left. It's just a little nicer than being all alone. When I'm dead worn out, in a reverie, I often think that when it comes time to die, I want to breathe my last in a kitchen. Whether it's cold and I'm all alone, or somebody's there and it's warm, I'll stare death fearlessly in the eye. If it's a kitchen, I'll think, how good. Before the Tonabe family took me in, I spent every night in the kitchen. After my grandmother died, I couldn't sleep. One morning at dawn I trundled out of my room in search of comfort and found that the one place I could sleep was beside the refrigerator. My parents, my name is Mikochi Sakurai, both died when they were young. After that my grandparents brought me up. I was going into junior high when my grandfather died. From then on, it was just my grandmother and me. When my grandmother died the other day, I was taken by surprise. My family had steadily decreased one by one as the years went by, but when it suddenly dawned on me that I was all alone, everything before my eyes seemed false. The fact that time continued to pass in the usual way in this apartment where I grew up, even though now I was here all alone, amazed me. It was total science fiction. The blackness of the cosmos. 3 days after the funeral I was still in a daze. Steeped in a sadness so great I could barely cry, shuffling softly in gentle drowsiness, I pulled my futon into the deathly silent kitchen. Gleaming kitchen. Wrapped in a blanket, like Linus, I slept. The hum of the refrigerator kept me from thinking of my loneliness. There, the long night came on in perfect peace, and morning came. But I just wanted to sleep under the stars. I wanted to wake up in the morning light. Aside from that, I just drifted, listless. However, I couldn't exist like that. Reality is wonderful. I thought of the money my grandmother had left me. Just enough. The place was too big, too expensive, for one person. I had to look for another apartment. There was no way around it. I thumbed through the listings, but when I saw so many places all the same lined up like that, it made my head swim. Moving takes a lot of time and trouble. It takes energy. I had no strength. My joints ached from sleeping in the kitchen day and night. When I realized how much effort moving would require, I'd have to pull myself together and go look at places. Move my stuff. Get a phone installed. I lay around instead, sleeping, in despair. It was then that a miracle, a godsend, came calling one afternoon. I remember it well. Ding dong. Suddenly the doorbell rang. It was a somewhat cloudy spring afternoon. I was intently involved in tying up old magazines with string while glancing at the apartment listings with half an eye banana Yoshimoto. But no interest, wondering how I was going to move. Flustered, looking like I'd just gotten out of bed, I ran out and without thinking undid the latch and opened the door. Thank God it wasn't a robber. There stood Yuichi Tonabe. Thank you for your help the other day, I said. He was a nice young man, a year younger than me, who had helped out a lot at the funeral. I think he'd said he went to the same university I did. I was taking time off. Not at all, he said. Did you decide on a place to live yet? Not even close. I smiled. I see. Would you like to come in for some tea? No. I'm on my way somewhere and I'm kind of in a hurry. He grinned. I just stopped by to ask you something. I was talking to my mother, and we were thinking you ought to come to our house for a while. Heh, I said. In any case, why don't you come over tonight around 7? Here's the directions. Okay, I said vacantly, taking the slip of paper. Alright, then, good. Mom and I are both looking forward to your coming. His smile was so bright as he stood in my doorway that I zoomed in for a close-up on his pupils. I couldn't take my eyes off him. I think I heard a spirit call my name. Okay, I said. I'll be there. Bad as it sounds, it was like I was possessed. His attitude was so totally cool, though, I thought I could trust him. In kitchen. The black gloom before my eyes, as it always is in cases of bewitchment, I saw a straight road leading from me to him. He seemed to glow with white light. That was the effect he had on me. Okay, see you later, he said, smiling, and left. Before my grandmother's funeral I had barely known him. On the day itself, when Yuichi Tonabe showed up all of a sudden, I actually wondered if he had been her lover. His hands trembled as he lit the incense. His eyes were swollen from crying. When he saw my grandmother's picture on the altar, again his tears fell like rain. My first thought when I saw that was that my love for my own grandmother was nothing compared to this boy's, whoever he was. He looked that sad. Then, mopping his face with a handkerchief, he said, "Let me help with something." After that, he helped me a lot. Yuichi Tonabe. I must have been quite confused if I took that long to remember when I'd heard grandmother mention his name. He was the boy who worked part-time at my grandmother's favorite flower shop. I remembered hearing her say, any number of times, things like, "What a nice boy they have working there. That Tonabe boy today, again." Grandmother loved cut flowers. Because the ones in our kitchen were not allowed to wilt, she'd go to Banana Yoshimoto, the flower shop, a couple of times a week. When I thought of that, I remembered him walking behind my grandmother, a large potted plant in his arms. He was a long-limbed young man with pretty features. I did Banana Yoshimoto. Nothing at all has any flavor for me now," said Yuichi, staring at the lamp on the table. "I must be really tired." "That's only natural," I said, somewhat surprised. "When your grandmother died you were like this, too." I remember it well. We'd be watching TV or whatever, and you'd say, like, "What are they saying?" And I'd look up at you and you'd have this expression on your face, like your mind was blank. Now I understand completely. "Yuichi," I said, "the fact that you're relaxed enough with me now to tell me how you're really feeling is a source of comfort to me. It makes me very happy. So happy I feel like shouting it from the rooftops." "What kind of talk is that?" "Sounds like it was translated from English." Yuichi smiled, the light from the table lamp shining on his face. His shoulders shook beneath his navy blue sweater. "It does, doesn't it?" I wanted to say, "If there's anything I can do, just say so," but I stopped myself. I silently implored, "May the memory of this moment, here, the glowing impression of the two of us facing each other in this warm, bright place, drinking lovely hot tea, help save him, even a little bit." Words, too explicit, always cast a shadow over that faint glow. Outside, night had come. The indigo-colored air was growing colder. Whenever we got in the car, he would always open my door first and get me seated before he climbed in the driver's side. I mentioned it as we pulled out. There aren't many kitchen men who will open a car door for a woman. I think it's really great. Eriko raised me that way, he said, laughing. If I didn't open the door for her, she'd get mad and refuse to get in the car. Even though she was a man, I said, laughing. Right, even though she was a man. With that, silence fell with a thud. It was night in the city. We watched the people come and go while we waited at the light. Businessmen and office girls, young people and old, all beautifully aglow in the headlights. Enveloped in the silent cold, bundled in sweaters and coats, it was the hour when everyone was headed for someplace warm. Then it suddenly occurred to me, Yuichi must have opened the car door for that awful girl as well. Inexplicably, my seatbelt seemed too tight. I realized with amazement, oh, this must be jealousy. Like children when they first learn why people say ouch, this was my first experience of it. Now that Eriko was dead, the two of us, alone, were flowing down that river of light, suspended in the cosmic darkness, and were approaching a critical juncture. I understood. I understood it from the color of the sky, the shape of the moon, the blackness of the night sky under which we passed. The building lights, the street lights, were unforgiving. He stopped in front of my house. "So," he said, "be sure to bring me back something." After this he'd be going back to that apartment, alone. Soon, no doubt, he'd be watering his plants. 77. Banana Yoshimoto. An eel pie, of course. I laughed. His profile was dimly illuminated by the streetlights. An eel pie? You mean those coiled pastries? You can buy those at any food stand. Well, then some tea, perhaps. How about some pickled wasabi root? Really? I can't stand the stuff. Do you like it? Only the kind with roe in it. Okay, that's what I'll bring you. I smiled and opened the car door. Suddenly a freezing draft came blowing in. "It's cold," I exclaimed. "Yuichi, it's cold, cold, cold." I buried my face in his arm, gripping it fiercely. His warm sweater smelled of autumn leaves. "Surely it'll be a little warmer in Aizu," Yuichi said, almost contemplatively. I kept my face pressed to his side. "How long did you say you're staying?" he said, not moving. His voice resonated directly into my ear. 4 days and 3 nights. I gently pulled myself away. "You should come back feeling a little bit better, and we'll go out for tea again, okay?" He looked at me, smiling. I nodded, got out of the car, and waved goodbye. As I watched him drive off, I thought, I can't say everything that happened today was unpleasant. Whether she or I were winning or losing, who could say? Who could know which of us was in the better position? The score couldn't be determined. Besides, there was kitchen. No standard of measure, and, particularly on this cold night, I couldn't even hazard a guess. A memory of Eriko, the saddest one of all. Of all the many plants in her terrace window, the one she had acquired first was the potted pineapple. She told me about it once. It was the dead of winter. I was still a man then, Mikage. A handsome man, even though my eyes were different and my nose was a little flatter. Because I hadn't had the plastic surgery yet, you see? Even I can't remember what I looked like anymore. It was a summer dawn and the air was chilly. Yuichi was away for the night, and Eriko had brought back a customer's gift of meat buns. As was my habit, I was taking notes while watching a cooking program I had recorded the day before. The blue dawn sky was slowly beginning to grow lighter in the east. "Shall we eat these meat buns?" "It was so sweet of him to bring them to me," she had said, turning on the broiler and making jasmine tea. Suddenly she launched into the story. I was a little surprised. I had assumed she was going to relate some unpleasant incident at the club. I listened sleepily. Her voice sounded like a voice in a dream. It was a long time ago, you see. Yuichi's mother was dying. I was a man, and she was my wife. She had cancer. At this point it was getting worse by the day. Anyhow, because we loved each other so much, every day I went to Banana Yoshimoto. Be with her at the hospital. I foisted Yuichi on a neighbor. I had a job then, so I sat with her before and after work every spare minute. Yuichi would come with me on Sundays, but he was too young to know what was going on. I had what you could call a desperate faith. I still had hope, no matter how little. Each day for me was the darkest in the world. I didn't feel it so much at the time, but she was in an even darker place. Eriko cast down her eyes, as if she were telling the sweetest of stories. In the blue light she looked thrillingly beautiful. My wife said one day, "How I'd love to have some living thing in this room." Living things were connected to the sun. I thought, a plant, yes, a plant. She urged me to get a big potted plant, one that didn't require much care. I raced to the flower shop, overjoyed that there was something I could give her. A typical male. At that time I didn't know Benjamin from St. Paulia. I only knew I didn't want a cactus, so I bought her a pineapple plant. It was a plant I could understand. It had lit the fruit growing on it and everything. When I carried it into the sick room she looked delighted and thanked me again and again. She was getting closer and closer to the end. One evening, 3 days before she went into a coma, she said to me, just as I was leaving, "Please take the pineapple home." To look at her she didn't seem worse than usual. Naturally we hadn't told her she had cancer, but it was as if she knew, as if she were whispering her last wishes. I was surprised and said, "Why? I can see that it's withering, but wouldn't you rather have it?" But she begged me, in tears, kitchen, to take it home, this sunny plant from a southern place, before it became infused with death. I had no choice. I took it in my arms. Because I was crying my eyes out, I couldn't take a taxi. It was colder than hell, too. That may have been the first time it occurred to me I didn't like being a man. When I calmed down somewhat, after walking as far as the station and having a drink in a little bar, I took the train. Banana Yoshimoto. Bed that I had, in the pocket of my school uniform a little bell that had fallen off the cat. "Here," I said, a farewell gift, and handed it to him. "What's this?" he said laughing, and although it wasn't the most creative gift took it from my palm and wrapped it carefully in his handkerchief as if it was something precious. He surprised me. It was not typical behavior for a boy that age. As it turns out, it was love. Whether he did it because the gift was from me or because that was how he was raised, not to treat a gift carelessly, it amazed me and made me warm to him. There was electric charge between our hearts, and its conduit was the sound of the bell. The whole time we spent apart on that class trip, we each had the bell on our minds. Whenever he heard it ring, he would remember me and the time we had spent together. I passed the trip imagining I could hear the bell across the vast sky, imagining the person who had it in his possession. After we got back, we fell deeply in love. For nearly 4 years the bell was always with us. Each and every afternoon and evening, in each and everything we did, our first kiss, our big fights, rain and shine and snow, the first night we spent together, every smile and every tear, listening to music and watching TV whenever Hitoshi took out that case, which he used as a wallet. We heard its faint, clear tinkling sound. It seemed as though I could hear it even when he wasn't there. You might say it was just a young girl's sentimentality, but I did think I heard it. That's how it felt to me then. There was one thing that always disturbed me profoundly. Sometimes, no matter how intently I would be staring at him, I would have the feeling that Hitoshi wasn't there. So many times, when he was asleep, I felt the need to put my ear to his heart. No matter how bright his smile, I would have to strain my eyes to see him. His facial expressions, the atmosphere around him, always had a kind of transparency. The whole time I was with him there was that feeling of ephemerality, uncertainty. If that was a premonition of what was to come, what a sorrowful one it was. A lover should die after a long lifetime. I lost Hitoshi at the age of 20, and I suffered from it so much that I felt as if my own life had stopped. The night he died, my soul went away to some other place and I couldn't bring it back. It was impossible to see the world as I had before. My brain ebbed and flowed, unstable, and I passed the days in a relentless state of dull oppression. I felt that I was fate to undergo one of those things it's better not to have to experience even once in a lifetime, abortion, prostitution, major illness. After all, we were still young, and who knows whether it would have been our last love. We had overcome many first hurdles together. We came to know what it is to be deeply tied to someone, and we learned to judge for ourselves the weight of many kinds of events. From these things, one by one, we constructed our 4 years. Now that it's over, I can shout it out. The gods are assholes. I loved Hitoshi more than life itself. For 2 months after Hitoshi died, every morning found me leaning over the railing of the bridge on the river drinking hot tea. I had begun to go jogging every day at dawn, since I slept very badly, and that point on the bridge was where I rested before the run back home. Sleeping at night was what I feared most. No worse than that was the shock of awakening. I dreaded the deep gloom that would fall when I remembered he was gone. My dreams were always about Hitoshi. After my painful, fitful sleep, whether or not I had been able to see him, on awakening I would know it had been only a dream. In reality I would never be with him again. And so I tried not to wake up. Going back to sleep was no answer. Depressed to the point of nausea, I would toss around in a cold sweat. Through my curtains I would see the sky getting lighter, blue-white, and I would feel abandoned in the chill and silence of dawn. It was so forlorn and cold, I wished I could be back in the dream. There I would be, wide-eyed, tortured by its lingering memory. It was always then that I truly woke up. Finally, exhausted from lack of sleep, beginning to panic at the prospect of that lonely time, like a bout of insanity in which I would wait for the first morning light, I decided to take up running. I bought myself an expensive 2-piece sweatsuit, running shoes, and even a small aluminum container in which to carry a hot drink. I thought, ironically, that beginners always over-equip, but still, it was best to look ahead. I began running just before spring vacation. I would run M****, moonlight shadow, to the bridge, turn around, and head home, where I would carefully wash out my neck towel and sweaty clothes. While they were in the dryer, I would help my mother make breakfast. Then I'd go back to bed for a while. That was my life. In the evenings I'd get together with friends, watch videos, whatever, anything to leave myself as little free time as possible. But the struggle was fruitless. There was only one thing I had any desire to do. I wanted to see Hitoshi. Yet at all costs I had to keep my hands and body and mind moving. Doing that, I hoped, albeit listlessly, would somehow, someday, lead to a breakthrough. There was no guarantee, but I would try to endure, no matter what, until it came. When my dog died, when my bird died, I had gotten through in more or less the same way. But it was different this time. Without a prospect in sight, day after day went by, like losing one's mind bit by bit. I would repeat to myself, like a prayer, it's all right, the day will come when you'll pull out of this. The river, spanned by a white bridge, was wide, and divided our part of the city almost exactly in half. It took me about 20 minutes to reach it. I loved that place. It was there that I used to meet Hitoshi, who had lived on the other side of the river. Even after he died I still loved the place. On the deserted bridge, with the city misted over by the blue haze of dawn, my eyes absently followed the white embankment that continued on to who knows where. I rested, enveloped in the sound of the current, leisurely banana Yoshimoto, drinking hot tea. Standing there in the clear air that tingled with cold, I felt just the tiniest bit close to death myself. It was only in the severe clarity of that horribly lonely place that I could feel at ease. My self-torture stopped when I was there. Without this respite I would never have been able to get through the days. I was pierced by how much I needed it. That morning I awoke with a start from a vicious nightmare. It was 5:30. In the dawn of what promised to be a clear day I dressed and went out as usual. It was still dark, not a soul was out. The air was bitingly cold, the streets misty white, the sky a deep navy blue. Rich gradatians of red were coming up in the east. I had to force myself to run. My breath was labored. The notion that running this much on not enough sleep was only tormenting my body passed through my mind, but I ignored it. I can sleep when I get home, I thought in my befuddled brain. The streets were so utterly quiet that I struggled to remain fully conscious. The sound of the current grew louder as I approached the river. The colors in the sky were changing moment by moment. I was leaning over the railing the way I always did upon reaching the bridge, absently looking at the rows of buildings on the street, which hung in a faint mist, as if submerged in an ocean of blue air. The river was roaring, sweeping along anything and everything in its way on a stream of white foam. The wind it gave off blew cold and seemed to suck the perspiration from my face. A half-moonlight shadow. M6 on shone serenely in the still brisk March sky. My breath came out in puffs of white. I took the cap off my aluminum BCF and poured out some tea, still looking out over the river. Just then I suddenly heard a voice from behind me pipe up. "What kind of tea is that? Could I have some?" It startled me, so much so that I dropped the bottle in the river. I still had a full cup of steaming tea in one hand. Imagining God knows what, I turned around, and there stood a young woman with a smile on her face. I knew she was older than me, but for some reason I couldn't guess her age. Maybe about 25. She had short hair and very clear, large eyes. She wore a thin white coat, but seemed not to feel the cold in the least. She had popped up before I had a clue that anyone was there behind me. Then, looking cheerful, she said in a slightly nasal but sweet voice, "It's just like that Brothers Grimm story about the dog, isn't it? Or was that Aesop?" She laughed. "In that instance," I said coolly, "the dog dropped his bone when he saw his own reflection in the water. Nobody sneaked up behind him." She said, smiling, "I'd like to buy you a new thermos." "Thank you," I said, showing her a smile in return. She spoke so calmly that I was not afraid of her, and she wasn't attempting familiarities. She didn't seem crazy, nor did she look like a drunk on her way home at dawn. Her eyes were too knowing and serene. The expression on her face hinted that she had tasted deeply of the sorrows and joys of this world. The air around her seemed somehow charged. After taking one sip to wet my throat, I offered her the banana Yoshimoto cup. "Here, have the rest. It's purt. "Oh, I love that," she said, taking the cup with a slender hand. "I just got here. I came from pretty far away." She looked down at the river. Her eyes had the bright sparkle of a traveler's. "Sightseeing?" I asked, wondering what could have brought her to this particular place. "Yes. Soon, on this spot, there'll be something to see that only happens every 100 years. Have you ever heard about it?" "Something to see?" "Yes. If all the conditions are right." "What, exactly?" "I can't tell you yet. But I promise I will, because you shared your tea with me." She laughed as she said it, and I almost failed to catch that last part. The mood of approaching morning seemed to fill the whole world. The rays of the rising sun spread over the blue sky, illuminating the faintly sparkling layers of air with white light. It was time to be getting back, so I said, "Well, goodbye." At that she looked me directly in the eye with that same bright expression. "My name is Urara," she said. "What's yours?" "Satsuki," I answered. "Let's get together again," said Urara, waving goodbye. I waved back and started running home. She was an odd one. I had no idea what she was talking about, but somehow I knew that she was someone who did not live like Moonlight Shadow. Other people. With each step I took I grew more uneasy, and I couldn't help but turn and look back. Urara was still on the bridge. I saw her face in profile as she watched the river. It shocked me, it was not that of the person I had just talked with. I had never seen such a severe expression on anyone. She noticed me standing there, smiled brightly again, and waved. Flustered, I returned her wave and broke into a run. In heaven's name, what kind of person was she? I pondered it for quite some time. More and more, that morning in the sunlight, the impression of that mysterious Urara carved itself with baroque F-degree into my sleepy brain. Hitoshi had an extremely eccentric younger brother. His way of thinking, his responses to events, were curioser and curioser. He lived exactly as if his awareness of things had been formed in some other dimension, after which he was plopped down on this planet to fend for himself. That was my first impression of him, and I stick by it. His name was Hiragi. He was to turn 18 this month. Hiragi and I had arranged to meet, after he got out of school, in a coffee shop on the 4th floor of a department store. In he came, wearing a sailor-style girl's high school uniform, complete with midi blouse and skirt. The truth is I was mortified, but he acted so natural that Banana YOSHIMOTO. I managed to feign calmness. Sitting down across from me he asked, breathless, "Were you waiting long?" When I shook my head he smiled brightly. After he had ordered, the waitress stared him up and down and muttered, "Yes sir," mystified. He didn't look much like Hitoshi, but sometimes the way his face and fingers moved would remind me so much of his brother that my heart would stop. "Oh," I said, purposely giving voice to my surprise, as I always did when he reminded me of Hitoshi. It was part of a ritual between us. "What is it?" he said, looking at me, cup in hand. You reminded me of him, just then," I said. Then, according to our ritual, he said, "I'll do Hitoshi," and imitated his brother. We both laughed. That was the only way the two of us had to make light of the wounds in our hearts. I'd lost my boyfriend, but he had lost both brother and girlfriend at once. His girlfriend, Yumiko, had been a small, pretty girl his own age, and a tennis ace. The four of us were close in age, got along well, and had often hung out together. I would go over to Hitoshi's house and Yumiko would be there with Hiragi. I couldn't count how many times the four of us stayed up all night, playing games. The night it happened, Hitoshi was giving Yumiko a ride from his house, where she'd been visiting Hiragi, to the train station. On the way they got into an accident. It wasn't his fault. Still, the two of them were killed instantly. Moonlight Shadow. "So, you're jogging," said Hiragi. "Yes. Then why are you getting so fat?" "It must be because I lie around all afternoon," I said, laughing. The truth was, I was getting noticeably thinner. "Sports aren't good for you, it's true," he said. "But I have an idea, they just opened this place near my house that makes incredible tempura on rice. Very fattening. Let's go there now, right now." Although Hitoshi and Hiragi had been very different from each other, they were both just naturally kind in a way that was without affectation or ulterior motives. That's how they were raised. The sort of kindness that makes a person wrap a bell in a handkerchief. I'd love to, I said. The girls' school uniform Hiragi was wearing had been Yumiko's. After she died he had started wearing it to school, though he went to one where uniforms were not required. Yumiko had liked to wear the uniform. Both sets of parents had begged him, in tears, not to do it, saying Yumiko wouldn't have liked to see him in a skirt. Hiragi just laughed and ignored them. When I asked him if he wore it for sentimental reasons, he said that wasn't it. Things are just things, they can't bring back the dead. It just makes me feel better. Are you going to wear it forever? I asked him. Banana Yoshimoto. His face darkened a little. I don't know. Aren't people talking about you? Aren't they saying things about you at school? No, they know that's just how I am. Actually, I'm getting a lot of sympathy. And the girls are crazy about me. It must be because, wearing a skirt, perhaps they think I understand them. I laughed. Well, that's good, isn't it? Outside the glass wall of the coffee shop, crowds of boisterous shoppers came and went. The whole department store that evening was jovial, and gaily illuminated spring clothes were on display. Now I understood. His sailor outfit, my jogging. They served exactly the same purpose. I wasn't as eccentric as him, so I was satisfied with mere jogging. Because nothing so conventional would do for Hiragi, he chose the sailor outfit, as a variation. Neither of course was anything more than a way of trying to lend some life to a shriveled spirit. It was a way to divert our minds, to kill time. Both Hiragi and I, in the last 2 months, had unconsciously assumed facial expressions we had never worn before, expressions that showed how we were battling not to think of what we had lost. If, in a flash, we remembered, we would suddenly be crushed with the knowledge of our loss, and find ourselves standing alone in the darkness. I got up. If I'm going to eat dinner out, I have to call home and let them know. What about you? Is it okay for you not to eat at home? 120. Moonlight Shadow. Hiragi said, oh, yeah, right. My father's away on a business trip. So your mother's all alone. You should probably go home. It's okay. I'll just have something delivered to her. It's still early, so she won't have started cooking yet. I'll pay for it, and she'll get this surprise dinner, compliments of her son. That's a sweet idea, I said. It'll cheer her up, don't you think? Hiragi smiled artlessly. This young boy, usually so precociously adult, looked his age right then. One winter day Hitoshi had said, I have a younger brother. His name is Hiragi. It was the first time I had heard of him. We were climbing the long stone stairway behind the school, under leaden grey skies that promised snow. His hands in his coat pockets, his breath a cloud of white, Hitoshi had said, but in a way he's more grown up than I am. Grown up? I laughed. How can I say it? He thinks well on his feet. But still, when it comes to the family, he's strangely childlike. Yesterday my father nicked his hand a little on a piece of glass, and my brother freaked out really, seriously freaked out. You would have thought the sky had fallen. I just now thought of it. His reaction was so out. How old is he? I guess he's what, 15? Banana Yoshimoto. Does he look like you? I'd like to meet him. Well, I warn you, he's pretty weird. So much so you'd never take him for my brother. I'm afraid if you meet him you might stop liking me. Yes, he certainly is an odd one, said Hitoshi, smiling a classic elder brother smile. Well, is your little brother so strange that you're going to wait till years from now to introduce me, when you're sure of my unwavering love? No, I was kidding. It'll be all right. I'm sure you'll get on fine. You're a little strange yourself, and Hiragi likes good people. Good people? Right. Hitoshi laughed, still looking straight ahead. At times like that I always felt shy. The stairs were steep and I hurried up, flustered. The windows of the white school building reflected the darkening dead of winter sky. I remember climbing step by step in my black shoes and knee socks, the swish, swish of the skirt of my school uniform. Outside, the night was filled with the scent of spring. Hiragi's sailor-style uniform was hidden under his coat, which was a relief to me. The light given off by the department store windows shone white on the faces of the bustling crowd. In spite of the sweet smell of spring on the wind, it was still cold. I took my gloves from my pocket. The tempura place is near my house, so it's a bit of a walk, said Hiragi. We'll cross the bridge, then, won't we? I fell silent, moonlight shadow. Remembering the encounter with Urara. Every morning since then I had gone running, but I hadn't seen her again. I was absently thinking about that when Hiragi suddenly said in a loud voice, oh, don't worry, of course I'll drive you back. He had interpreted my silence as worrying about how I'd get home. No, that's no problem. It's still early, I said, confused, thinking, you reminded me of him just then, although this time I didn't say it. At that moment he was so like Hitoshi there was no need to ask Hiragi to do him. A kindness spoken out of reflex, at once impersonal and generous, but by no means bridging the distance established between two people. It always produces in me that sense of transparency, that deeply moving emotion I was being reminded of right then. An unbearable sense of loss. The other day, I said as we set off, one morning when I was jogging, I met a strange person on the bridge. I was just remembering that. A strange person? You mean a man? Hiragi smiled. Jogging early in the morning can be dangerous. No, it's not that at all. It was a woman. Not an easy person to forget. Maybe you ought to see her again. It was true. For some reason I wanted terribly to see Urara. That expression on her face, it made my heart stop. She had been gentle and smiling with me, and then, as soon as she was alone again, if I had to describe it, I'd say the expression on her face was like that of a demon turned into a human who suddenly caught herself 123. The Nana Yoshimoto. Feeling emotions and was warning herself that she wasn't permitted to. It was unforgettable. I felt that my own pain and sadness had never even come close to hers. Perhaps there was still much worse in store for me. We came to a large intersection. Both Hiragi and I felt a little ill at ease. This was the scene of the accident. Even now cars were coming and going furiously. At the red light Hiragi and I stopped side by side. I wonder if there mightn't be ghosts here. Hiragi smiled, but his eyes weren't smiling at all. I thought you were going to say that, I said, trying to smile back. The traffic signal changed, and the river of light formed by the cars continued on its way. The signal shone brightly, suspended in the darkness. Hitoshi had died here. A feeling of solemnity slowly came over me. In places where a loved one has died, time stops for eternity. If I stand on the very spot, one says to oneself, like a prayer, might I feel the pain he felt? They say that on a visit to an old castle or whatever, the history of the place, the presence of people who walked there many years ago, can be felt in the body. Before, when I heard things like that, I would think, what are they talking about? But I thought I understood it now. This intersection, the colors of these buildings, and rows of shops in the darkness were Hitoshi's last sights. And it wasn't all that long ago. How afraid was he? Did he think of me, if even for a moonlight shadow? Flickering instant. Was the moon climbing high in the sky as it was now? It's green. I was staring so absent-mindedly at the moon that Hiragi had to give me a push on the shoulder. The small white light it gave off was so pretty, so cold, it was like a pearl. It's amazing how good this is, I said. The tempura on rice we were eating, seated at the counter in this new lit shop smelling of fresh wood, was so good it revived my appetite. Isn't it? Said Hiragi. Yes. It's delicious. So delicious it makes me grateful I'm alive, I said. So delicious I was moved to praise extravagant enough to make the counter person blush. I know. I knew you'd say that. You have excellent taste in food. It really makes me happy that you like it. After saying that all in one breath, with a big smile, Hiragi went to order the meal for his mother and have it delivered. With the bowl of food before me, I thought, I'm stubborn, and I'll probably be dragged even deeper into this darkness, but I have no choice. I must keep living this way. But, as soon as possible, I wanted this boy to be always smiling, like he was now, like he always used to, and without the sailor outfit. It was noon. Suddenly the phone rang. I had caught cold and was drowsing in bed. I hadn't even 125. BANANAYOSHIMOTO. Been able to go jogging. The ring of the telephone jabbed into my slightly feverish brain again and again. Sleepily I got out of bed. No one seemed to be home, so I had no choice. I went out into the hall and picked up the receiver. Yes. Hello. Is Satsuki there? It was an unfamiliar woman's voice. This is she, I said, puzzled. It's me, said the person across the phone lines. Urara. I was startled. Again she had shocked me. How in the world had she found me? Sorry this is so sudden, but I wonder if you're free just now? Can you come out and meet me? Sure. But why? How did you get my phone number? I said, faltering. She seemed to be calling from a phone booth, judging by the sound of traffic in the background. I heard little puffs of laughter. I just say to myself, I must get this phone number, and it just naturally comes to me, Urara said, as if reciting a spell. She said it in such a matter-of-fact, reasonable way that I thought, oh, I see. Meet me on the 5th floor of the department store across from the station, in the section where they sell thermoses. With that she hung up. Normally there would be no way I'd go out now, the way I feel with this cold. I should stay in bed, I thought after she had hung up. My legs were wobbly and it felt like my fever was getting worse. But still, driven by curiosity to 126. Moonlight shadow. See her again, I started to get ready. In the innermost recess of my heart the light of instinct was twinkling, and I was as free of doubt as if I had heard the command, go. In retrospect I realized that fate was a ladder on which, at the time, I could not afford to miss a single rung. To skip out on even one scene would have meant never making it to the top, although it would have been by far the easier choice. What motivated me was probably that little light still left in my half-dead heart, glittering in the darkness. Yet without it, perhaps, I might have slept better. I bundled up in warm clothing and got on my bike. It was a moon enveloped in warm sunlight. It made you think that spring would truly come. A light wind was blowing, soft and gentle on the face. The trees on the street were beginning to sprout their tiny infant leaves. A thin veil of mist hung distantly in the pale blue sky far beyond the city. Such blossoming delicability did not make my own insides flutter. It left me unmoved. The spring scenery could not enter my heart for love or money. It was merely reflected on the surface, like on a soap bubble. Everyone out on the streets was coming and going, looking happy, the lights shining through their hair. Everything was breathing, increasingly sparkling, swathed in the gentle sunlight. The pretty scene was brimming with life, but my soul was pining for the desolate streets of winter and for that river at dawn. I wished my heart would break and get it over with. There stood Urara, her back to the display of water 127. Banana Yoshimoto. Bottles. Wearing a pink sweater, standing ramrod straight in the midst of the crowd, this time she looked my age. Hi, I called. When I came nearer her eyes widened. What, she said. You have a cold. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know when I asked you to come out. I smiled. Is it that obvious? Yes, your face is bright red. So, let's choose quickly, shall we? Anyone you like. She turned to face the display. So what do you think? Probably a thermos, right? Or for running you might want a lighter one. This one is just like the one you dropped the other day. Or, oh, if it's design you care most about, let's go to where they sell ones made in China. Her enthusiasm as she said all this made me so happy, even I could feel myself turning bright red. Okay, that little white one. Beaming with pleasure, I pointed out a small thermos. The honored customer is a person of fine discernment, Urara said, and bought it for me. As we were drinking barley tea in a nearby rooftop garden tea shop, Urara said, I brought you this, too. She took a small packet from her coat pocket. Then another, and another, again and again. I could only stare. Somebody who owns a tea shop gave me this as a parting gift. There are all sorts of herbal teas, barley teas, Chinese teas, too. The names are written on the packages. Something to fill your thermos with. I hope you like them. Moonlight Shadow. Thank you, so much, I said, hesitant, pleased. Not at all. It was my fault you dropped yours in the river. The afternoon was clear and bright. The light illuminating the streets was so vivid it almost made one's heart ache. Clouds moved slowly, dividing the city below into patches of light and shadow. It was a peaceful afternoon. The weather was so tranquil that it almost made me forget I had any problems at all, aside from the fact that my nose was stuffed up and I could taste only a hint of what I was drinking. By the way, I said, how did you get my phone number, really? She smiled. I told you. That was the truth. For a long time I've been on my own, moving around from place to place, and I developed this ability to just sense things, calmly, like a wild animal. I don't remember exactly when that started, but... So I thought to myself, Satsuki's phone number is... And when I dialed, I just let my fingers move naturally. I usually get it right. Usually? I smiled. Yes, usually. When I'm wrong I just apologize, laugh, and hang up. Still it makes me ashamed of myself. Urara laughed cheerfully. I wanted to believe she got the number that way rather than by other, more normal methods. That's the effect she had on a person. Somewhere deep in my heart I felt I had known her long ago, and the reunion made me so nostalgic I wanted to weep tears of joy. I want to thank you for today. You've made me as happy as a lover, I said. 129. Banana Yoshimoto. Alright, then, here's a word from your lover. Get over that cold by the day after tomorrow. Why? Oh, is it the day after tomorrow? The something to see? Precisely. Alright. You mustn't tell anyone else. Urara lowered her voice a little. The day after tomorrow come to the place where we met the other day by no later than 4:57 a.m. If all goes well you may see something. What is this something? What kind of thing? Something invisible? I couldn't hold back a flood of doubts. Yes. But it depends on the weather, and also on you. Because this is a very subtle matter, there are no guarantees. Still, and this is just my intuition, I think there's a profound connection between you and that river. That's why I'm sure you'll be able to see it. The day after tomorrow, at the time I said, in that place, if a number of conditions are met, you may be able to see a kind of vision, something that happens only once every 100 years or so. I'm afraid. May is the best I can do. That explanation didn't really clarify much, either. Still, I was deeply thrilled, something I had not felt in a long time. Is it a good thing? Yes. Not just good, though priceless. That's up to you. That's up to me. Just now, when I'm so weak, with no strength to defend myself. Yes, I said. I'll be there. 130. Moonlight Shadow. Asterisk. The connection between me and the river. Even with my heart beating wildly, my mind shouted out an impromptu. Yes, the border between my country and Hitoshi's, that's what the river was to me. When I thought of the bridge, it was always with Hitoshi standing there, waiting for me to come. I was always late. He was always there before me. When we said goodbye, it was there that we parted, he going to one side of the river, me to the other. The last time was that way, too. So, I had said, you're going over to Tokahoshi's house after this. I was still happy then and had a healthy plumpness that I've lost now. This was our last conversation. Yes, after I stop off at home first. We haven't gotten all the guys together in a long time. Give them my regards. But I know what you all talk about when it's just guys. Anything wrong with that? He laughed. We had done nothing but have fun that whole day and, a little tipsy, we walked along laughing and joking. The bitingly cold night road was splendidly colored by the starry sky overhead, and I was light-hearted. The wind stung my cheeks, the stars twinkled. Our hands, joined in my pocket, palms touching, felt very warm and soft. Then, oh, he said, as if suddenly remembering something. But I swear, I'd never say anything bad about you. He was so touchingly funny as he said it that I had to bury my face in my muffler to stifle my laughter. To have loved Banana Yoshimoto. Each other this much for over 4 years, I thought, isn't it marvelous? That me seems 10 years younger than I feel now. The faint sound of the river reached our ears. The moment of our parting was approaching. The bridge. That bridge was where we left each other, never to meet again. The river roared, and the cold wind was like a slap in the face. Amid its vivid thundering, under the sky full of stars, we exchanged a short kiss, and thinking how much fun that winter vacation had been, we parted, smiling. The tinkle of the bell disappeared into the night. Hitoshi and I both cherished that sound. We had horrible fights and we both had our little outside flings. We suffered from the changing balance between love and desire. Children that we were, we hurt each other many times over. So it isn't that we were always as happy as we were that day. Our times together were often painful. Still, it was a good 4 years, and that day was an unusually perfect one for us, so much so as to make us fearful it would end. Of that day in which everything was just too beautiful in the transparent winter air, what I remember most is the sight, when I turned back to look, of Hitoshi's black jacket melting into the darkness. That scene is one I cried about over and over again. Or rather, whenever I recalled it, the tears would flow. I would dream of myself crossing the bridge, chasing after him and calling out, "You mustn't go." In the dream, Hitoshi would smile and say, "I didn't die after all, because you stopped me." Sometimes the memory would come to me in the middle of the day, and I would manage not to break down in moonlight shadow. Cobblick, but what good did it do me? I felt he had gone somewhere endlessly far from me, and my stoicism only made the feeling worse. When I parted with Urara, that something I might be able to see at the river was, for me, half joke, half hope. Urara, beaming, disappeared up the street. Maybe she's just telling me some weird kind of he, I thought, but I wouldn't even mind if, bright and early, I ran there, chest pounding, only to make a fool of myself. She had shown my heart a rainbow. The thing was, she had reminded me that I could get excited over something unknown, and a tiny window opened in my heart. Even if nothing happened, even if it turned out to be just the two of us watching the sparkling glints of the cold, flowing river, it would feel good. It would be enough for me. That was what I was thinking as I walked along, holding my thermos. On the way to get my bike where I'd left it at the station, I spotted Hiragi. There he was, in the middle of the street, wearing his regular clothes. He must be skipping school, I thought, which made me smile. It wasn't that I was hesitant to run up to him and call his name, it was just that because of my fever I couldn't muster the energy. So all I did was walk toward him without changing my pace. Just then he set off in the direction I was going anyway, so quite naturally I followed him up the street. He was a fast walker, and I, unwilling to go faster, soon fell behind. Banana Yoshimoto. I watched Hiragi. In his own clothes, he was good-looking enough to turn people's heads. Wearing a black sweater, he was walking along like he always did, tall, long-limbed, calm, cool, and light on his feet. No wonder I thought as I watched him from behind, the girls couldn't get enough of him. Yumiko had died, and he was wearing her uniform in her memory. It just didn't happen that often, losing one's brother and girlfriend at once. It was the epitome of unusual. Maybe I, too, were I a carefree high school girl, would long to be the one to restore him to life and would fall in love with him. Girls that age find nothing more attractive. If I just called out his name he would turn and smile at me. I knew that. But still, somehow I had a bad feeling about calling to him as he walked alone up the street. I felt there was nothing anyone could do for him. Or maybe it was just that I was terribly tired. Nothing could enter directly into my heart. All I wanted was to get through this as quickly as possible, to see the day when memories would be just memories. But the more I wanted that, the further away it seemed. Thinking of the future only made me shudder. Then Hiragi suddenly stopped, and I automatically stopped, too. Now you really are trading him, I said to myself, smiling. I took a step toward him and was about to call out, then I realized what he was looking at and froze in my tracks. He was staring into the window of a tennis shop. How well I understood the blank look on his face as he peered moonlight shadow into that window. He seemed to be feeling nothing at all. But in that very lack of expression, the profundity of what he was doing was transmitted nonetheless. It's like unconscious conditioning, I thought, like a baby duck trailing after some moving object, taking it for its mother. Though the baby duck is unaware of it, it's very touching for the observer. That's how I felt, watching Hiragi. In the spring light he stood among the crowd, staring detachedly into that window. The sight of all that tennis equipment must have had a powerful effect on him. It did the same thing for Hiragi that being with him did for me. Thanks to the trace of Hitoshi in him, his very presence calmed me. I thought how sad that was. I myself saw one of Yumiko's tennis matches. The first time I met her I thought she was cute, alright, but she struck me as a bit average, rather overly cheerful, not too deep, and I couldn't imagine what Hiragi saw in her that bewitched him so. With Yumiko, Hiragi was in a dream. On the surface he was the same old Hiragi, but something in her quieted his spirit. In real strength, she was his match. What is it about her? I asked Hitoshi one time. Apparently it's tennis, he said, smiling. Tennis? Yes. According to Hiragi, she's incredible. It was summer. The sun beat down mercilessly on the high school tennis court. Hitoshi, Hiragi, and I had gone 135. Banana Yoshimoto. To watch Yumiko play in the finals. The shadows were deep and dark under the blazing sun. Our throats were dry, everything was dazzlingly bright. And no doubt about it, she was incredible. She was a different person, not the little girl who ran after me laughing, calling, Satsuki, Satsuki. I was amazed when I saw her play. Hitoshi seemed surprised, too. Hiragi said with pride, see what I mean? Incredible, isn't she? She played a take-no-prisoners game of tennis, propelled by the full force of her intensity and powers of concentration. Then I knew how strong she really was. Her face was all determination. It was a face capable of murder. Still, after the deciding shot, the instant she'd won, she turned to Hiragi with her old baby-faced smile. It was impressive. The four of us had a lot of fun together, and I liked her very much. She'd say to me, Satsuki, let's the four of us always hang out together, don't you two ever break up? Teasing, I would smile and say, well, it won't be us. She would laugh and say, well, it won't be us either, and then it happened. It's too horrible. I doubted if he was recalling her at this moment like I was. Boys don't go out of their way to feel pain. But still, his eyes, his whole person, were saying one thing only. He himself would never speak it. To say it would mean to suffer from it. To suffer terribly. That thing was, I want her to come back. More than words, it was a prayer. I couldn't bear it. Was that, then, how I looked by the river at dawn? And is that moonlight shadow? Why Urara had spoken to me. Me, too. I, too, wanted to see him. I wanted him. Hitoshi. To come back. At the very least, I wanted to say a proper goodbye. I knew I wouldn't tell Hiragi what I'd seen today. I resolved to speak up cheerfully the next time, but for now I left without calling to him. With all that activity, my fever went up. It makes sense, I thought. It simply follows that if one goes ginning around town in the condition I was in, delirious, this would be the result. My mother laughed and asked me if it might not be like a teething fever. Weakly, I laughed back. But in a sense I think it was. Perhaps my unproductive thoughts had spread like poison throughout my body. That night, as usual, I awoke from a dream of Hitoshi. I dreamed that in spite of my fever I had run to the river and Hitoshi was there. He said to me, smiling, you've got a cold. What are you doing? That was the lowest point yet. When I opened my eyes it was dawn, time to get up and get dressed. But it was cold, so very cold, and in spite of the fact that my whole body felt flushed, my hands and feet were like ice. I had the chills, I shuddered, my whole body in pain. I opened my eyes, trembling in the half-darkness. I felt Banana Yoshimoto. I was battling something absurdly enormous. Then, from deep within, I began to wonder if I mightn't lose. It hurt to have lost Hitoshi. It hurt too much. When we were in each other's arms, I knew something that was beyond words. It was the mystery of being close to someone who is not family. My heart dropped out, and I was feeling what people fear the most. I touched the deepest despair a person can know. I was lonely. Hideously lonely. This was the worst. If I could get through this, morning would come, and I knew without a doubt that I would have fun again, laugh out loud. If only the sun would rise. If only morning would come. Whenever it had been like this before, I had set my teeth and stood up to it. But now, lacking the strength to go to the river, I could only suffer. Time inched along, as if I were walking on shards of glass. I felt that if I could only get to the river, Hitoshi really would be there. I felt insane. I was sick at heart. I sluggishly got up and went to the kitchen for some tea. My throat was parched. Because of my fever, the whole house looked surreally warped, distorted. The kitchen was ice cold and dark. Everyone was asleep. Delirious, I made tea and went back to my room. The tea seemed to help. It soothed my dry throat and my breathing became natural again. I sat up in bed and parted the curtains. From my room I had a good view of the front gate and yard. The trees and flowers rusted, trembling in the blue morning air. They seemed painted in flat colors, like a diorama in a museum. It was pretty. These days I was well moonlight shadow, aware of how the blue air of dawn makes everything seem purified. As I sat there peering out the window, I saw the shadow of a person coming up the sidewalk in front of my house. I wondered if it was a dream and blinked my eyes. It was Urara. Dressed in blue, grinning broadly, she looked at me and came toward me. At the gate she mouthed, "May I come in?" I nodded. She crossed the yard and reached my window. I opened it, my heart pounding. "Sure is cold out," she said. An icy wind came in through the window, freezing my feverish cheeks. The pure, clean air tasted delicious. "What's up?" I asked. I must have been beaming like a happy little kid. "I'm on my way home. Your cold is looking worse, you know. Here, I'll give you some vitamin C candy." Taking the candy from her pocket, she handed it to me, smiling artlessly. "You're always so good to me," I said in a hoarse voice. "You look like your temperature is very high. You must feel rotten." "Yes," I said. "I couldn't go running this morning. For some reason I felt like crying." With a cold, she spoke evenly, lowering her eyes a little. "Now is the hardest time. Maybe even harder than dying. But this is probably as bad as it can get. You might come to fear the next time you get a cold, it will be as bad as this, but if you just hold steady, it won't be. For the rest of your life. That's how it works. You could take the negative view and live in fear. Will it happen again?" But it 139. Banana YOSHIMOTO. Won't hurt so much if you just accept it as a part of life. With that she looked up at me, smiling. I remained silent, my eyes wide. Was she only talking about having a cold? Just what was she saying? The blue of the dawn, my fever, everything was spinning, and the boundary between dream and waking blurred. While her words were making their way into my heart, I was staring absently at her bangs, which were fluttering in the wind. "Well, see you tomorrow." With a smile, Aurora gently shut the window from the outside. She skipped lightly out the gate. Floating in a dream, I watched her walk away. That she had come to me at the end of a long night of misery made me want to cry tears of joy. I wanted to tell her, "How happy I am that you came to me like an apparition in that bluish mist. Now everything around me will be a little bit better when I wake up." At last I was able to fall asleep. When I awoke I knew that my cold was at least a little better. I slept so soundly that it was evening before I woke up. I got out of bed, took a shower, put on a fresh change of clothes, started drying my hair. My fever was down and I felt quite well, except for the sensation of my body having been through the mill. I wondered, under the hot wind of the hairdryer, if Aurora had really come to see me. Maybe it was just a dream. Her words resounded in my brain as if it had been. And had she really only been talking about having a cold? My face in the mirror had a touch of dark shadow on it. 140. Moonlight shadow. I had a feeling that I heard something faint, far away. I looked to one side and was startled. Aurora wasn't there anymore. The river, myself, the sky then, blended with the sounds of the wind and the river. I heard what I'd longed for. A bell. There was no question, it was Hitoshi's. The sound came, faintly tinkling, from a spot where no one was standing. I closed my eyes, making sure of the sound. Then I opened them, and when I looked across the river I felt crazier than I had in the whole last 2 months. I just barely managed to keep from crying out. There was Hitoshi. Across the river, if this wasn't a dream, and I wasn't crazy, the figure facing me was Hitoshi. Separated from him by the water, my chest welling up, I focused my eyes on that form, the very image of the memory I kept in my heart. Through the blue haze, he was looking in my direction. He had that worried expression he always had when I acted recklessly. His hands in his pockets, his eyes found mine. The years I had spent in his arms seemed both very near and very far away. We simply gazed at each other. Only the fading moon saw the too violent current, the too distant chasm between us. My hair, the collar of Hitoshi's dear, familiar shirt fluttered in the wind off the river as softly as in a dream. "Hitoshi, do you want to talk to me?" "I want to talk to you. I want to run to your side, take you in my arms, and rejoice in being together again. But the tears 145. Banana Yoshimoto. Flowed, fate has decided that you and I be so clearly divided like this, facing each other across the river, and I don't have a say in it. My tears fell like rain, all I could do was stare at him. Hitoshi looked sadly back at me. I wished time could stop, but with the first rays of the rising sun everything slowly began to fade away. Before my eyes, Hitoshi grew faint. When I began to panic, he smiled and waved his hand. Again and again, he waved his hand. He was disappearing into the blue void. I, too, waved. Dear, much missed Hitoshi. I tried to burn the line of his dear shoulders, his dear arms, all of him, into my brain. The faint colors of his form, even the heat of the tears running down my cheeks, I desperately struggled to memorize it all. The arching lines described by his arm remained, like an afterimage, suspended in the air. His form was slowly growing fainter, disappearing. I stared at it through my tears. By the time I could no longer see anything at all, everything had returned to normal, morning by the river. I looked to one side. There stood Urara. Still facing straight ahead, a heartbreaking sadness in her eyes, she asked me, "Did you see it?" "Yes," I said, wiping away my tears. "Was it everything you had hoped?" This time she turned to face me, smiling. Relief diffused through my heart. "It was," I said, smiling back at her. The two of us stood there in the sunshine for some time, as morning came. Moonlight shadow. The donut shop had just opened. Urara, her eyes a little sleepy, said over a hot cup of coffee, "I came to this place because I, too, lost my lover to an early death. I came hoping to say a last goodbye. Were you able to?" I asked. "Yes." Urara smiled a little. "It really does happen only once every 100 years or so, and then only if a number of chance factors happen to line up right. The time and the place are not definitely set. People who know about it call it the Weaver Festival phenomenon. It can only take place near a large river. Some people can't see it at all. The residual thoughts of a person who has died meet the sadness of someone left behind, and the vision is produced. This was my first experience of it, too. I think you were very lucky today. Every 100 years. My mind raced at the thought of the probabilities involved in my having been able to see it. When I arrived here to take a preliminary look at the site, there you were. My animal instincts told me that you had lost someone yourself. That's why I invited you." The morning sun shone through her hair. Urara, smiling, was still as a statue while she spoke. What kind of person was she, really? Where had she come from and where would she go from here? And who had she seen across the river? I couldn't ask her. Parting and death are both terribly painful. But to keep Banana Yoshimoto, nursing the memory of a love so great you can't believe you'll ever love again is a useless drain on a woman's energies. Urara spoke through a mouthful of donut as if making casual chit-chat. "So I think it's for the best that we were able to say a proper, final goodbye today." Her eyes became terribly sad. "Yes," I said. "So do I." Urara's eyes narrowed gently as she sat in the sunlight. Hitoshi waving goodbye. It was a painful sight, like a ray of light piercing my heart. Whether it had been for the best was not something I as yet fully understood. I only knew that, right now, sitting in the strong sunlight, its lingering memory in my breast was very painful. It hurt so much I could barely breathe. Still, looking at the smiling Urara before me, amid the smell of weak coffee, the feeling was strong within me of having been very near to something. I heard the windows rattle in the wind. Like Hitoshi when we parted, no matter how much I could lay bare my heart, no matter how much I strained my eyes, that something would remain transitory. That was certain. That something shone in the gloom with the strength of the sun itself. At a great speed, I was coming through. In a downpour of blessings, I prayed, as though it were a hymn, "Let me become stronger." "Where will you go now?" I asked as we walked out of the donut shop. Smiling, she took my hand. "We'll meet again someday. I'll never forget your phone number." Moonlight shadow. With that, she melted into the wave of people crowding the morning streets. I watched her go and thought, I, too, will not forget. "How very much you have given me." "I saw something the other day," said Hiragi. I had gone to meet him to give him a birthday present during the lunch break at his high school, my alma mater. I had been waiting on a bench by the school grounds, watching the students come and go, when he came running up to me. He was no longer wearing the sailor outfit. He sat down next to me. "You saw what?" I asked. "Yumiko," he said. My heart skipped a beat. Students in white gym suits ran past us, kicking up dust. "The morning of, was it the day before yesterday?" He continued. "It may have been a dream. I was sort of half asleep when suddenly the door opened and Yumiko walked in. It was all so normal I forgot she was dead and I said, 'Yumiko?' She smiled, put her finger to her HPS, and said, 'That's it.' She went to my closet, carefully took out the sailor outfit, and bundled it up in her arms. Then, her HPS silently forming bye-bye, she waved goodbye. I didn't know what to do. I fell back asleep, thinking it must have been a dream. But the sailor outfit is gone. I looked everywhere for it. Then I just suddenly burst out crying. I said. Could it be that it could happen somewhere other than the river? It was the right day, the right morning. With Urara gone I had no way of knowing for 149. Banana Yoshimoto. Sure. But he was so calm about it. There was more to Hiragi than met the eye. Perhaps he had the power to draw an event to himself that should only have occurred at the river. Do you think I've lost my mind? He asked, jokingly. In the faint spring afternoon sunshine, the lunch hour hubbub coming from the school building carried on the wind. I laughed, gave him his present, a record, and said, I recommend jogging when you feel like that. Hiragi laughed, too. Sitting there in the light, he laughed and laughed. Hitoshi. I'll never be able to be here again. As the minutes slide by, I move on. The flow of time is something I cannot stop. I haven't a choice. I go. One caravan has stopped, another starts up. There are people I have yet to meet, others I'll never see again. People who are gone before you know it, people who are just passing through. Even as we exchange hellos, they seem to grow transparent. I must keep living with the flowing river before my eyes. I earnestly pray that a trace of my girl-child self will always be with you. For waving goodbye, I thank you. Afterward. For a very long time there was something I wanted to say in a novel, and I wanted, no matter what it took, to continue writing until I got the saying of it out of my system. This book is what resulted from that history of persistence. Growth and the overcoming of obstacles are inscribed on a person's soul. If I have become any better at fighting my daily battles, be they violent or quiet, I know it is only thanks to my many friends and acquaintances. I 151.